He shook his head. He still felt rattled from waking up in such a fright. "I'm sure you needed it," said his mom with a tired smile. As usual, she looked as if she could use a long nap herself. "Well, I was afraid you'd worry when you didn't hear from me, but I was rushing to make the first bus. Otherwise, it would have been another half hour." She beckoned him over for a hug. "I got asked to trade shifts. I'll have to work Saturday, but it's nice for tonight anyway, right?" She kissed his head and walked into the kitchen. "Sure," said Reuben, after a pause. He tried not to sound disappointed, but it had just occurred to him that now he was going to have to put off testing the watch. After dinner, his mom glanced at the clock and said that an old movie was about to come on. "Looks straight up silly," she said, "but it might be fun. What do you think?" Reuben's scalp tingled. Just like that, he had his opportunity. "Do you care if I miss the start?" Reuben asked. "I kind of want to finish a book I'm reading. I only have a few pages left." It was a thin excuse, but plausible. He usually did have a book going. His mom patted his cheek. "Go read. I'll fill you in." Reuben retreated to his room and closed the door. He found a library book he'd already finished, opened it to the last chapter, and laid it on his bed. Beyond the door, he could hear his mom switching on the television, then moving about the kitchen, pouring popcorn kernels into a pot. He knew he should wait until she went to bed, but it was the last test. He had to know. He got out the watch and key. From the television came the muffled sounds of movie dialogue. He heard his mom groaning at some feeble joke. He set the watch to 12 o'clock. "Midnight," he whispered, and felt a shudder run through him. He had a sudden conviction that he ought to have tried the 12 o'clock setting first. Wasn't midnight always the magical hour? Then he had to laugh at himself. What was he expecting anyway? Certainly not magic. It wasn't as if he believed in fairy tales. Besides, he was thinking of 12 o'clock as midnight, but of course it could also be noon. Nonetheless, it was with a sense of powerful expectation that Reuben wound the watch. Moment of truth, he thought, easing the key out of its winding position. And everything went black. Reuben yelped. He thought he might throw up. He closed his eyes and opened them again and still saw nothing but darkness. He squeezed them tightly, opened them again. Nothing. His skin burned with panic. His mom knocked on the door. "Reuben, are you okay?" Reuben looked toward the door, but saw nothing. He opened his mouth to answer, but found himself speechless with horror. The door opened. His mom's voice said, "Reuben? Reuben?" Then, to Reuben's even greater shock, her voice retreated. He heard her walking to the bathroom calling his name, then into her bedroom. He couldn't make sense of it, was still in too much of a panic to think. His thoughts were a terrifying jumble. It took him several seconds to remember the watch in his hand. The watch! He flung it down onto the bed as if it were a burning coal. The instant he did so, he could see again. His relief was so powerful that tears started to his eyes. He bent forward, covering his face with his hands, trying not to weep. For some sliver of awareness in him understood that he needed to protect this terrible secret, to keep it from his mom at all costs.